Welcome to HOA Karma Files. The certified envelope showed up like a threat. You are not allowed to do that without a pass. Diane Morgan pointed at the bright tow warning sticker slapped on my work van and screamed that it was authorized under an old decision, and I could not question it. She held up a laminated sheet like it was a warrant. I stood there with the receipt still in my hand, the afternoon heat shimmering off the asphalt near the Survey Ridge Terrace Association clubhouse, and I knew something was very wrong. I am a pest control technician in Boston, Massachusetts. I keep detailed service logs because my clients depend on precise timing and proof of entry. I had been living in Survey Ridge Terrace for 8 months, and the rules here were less about guidance and more about leverage. Diane was the architectural committee chair, and she had made it clear from day one that compliance was not optional. The town notice cited a board decision from 3 months before I even moved in. I pulled the receipt out of the plastic sleeve and held it up. This says the HOA never filed a valid work restriction for commercial vehicles. The tow company voided the call. Diane blew the whistle hanging from her lanyard. She did that when she wanted to summon attention. 2 neighbors stopped mid-walk and turned. I do not care what you think. I care what the rule says. She jabbed her finger at the sticker again. This vehicle was flagged under Section 4-C, and the enforcement was approved at the October meeting. I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA portal. I had been checking it obsessively since the first notice arrived 2 weeks ago. Show me the minutes from that meeting. I need to see the vote. Diane folded her arms. I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes. The decision was made. You are not here, so it does not apply to you retroactively, but the rule itself is still active. That made no sense. I scrolled through the portal. The October minutes were not posted. The September minutes ended with a note that the next meeting would address parking compliance, but there was no follow-up. I looked up. Where is the October packet? Diane turned and walked toward the clubhouse entrance. You can file a records request if you want to waste everyone's time. I share the car with my sister, who works early mornings at a hospital. A tow would strand both of us. I could not let this slide. I stayed calm, because I had one piece of proof that would end the whole game. I followed Diane to the clubhouse. A bright orange work light sat aimed at the doorway, left over from a weekend maintenance project. She stepped around it and pushed through the front door without holding it. I caught it before it swung shut and walked into the lobby. The air was stale, and the walls were covered with framed copies of old newsletters. Diane stood at the front desk, pulling a 3-ring binder off the shelf. Here. She dropped it on the counter. Section 4. Read it yourself. I flipped to the tab. The parking section was 2 pages long, single-spaced, and referenced a dozen subclauses. Buried in the middle was a line about commercial vehicle restrictions requiring board approval for any variance. I tapped the page. This says I need approval for a variance. I never asked for one because I am parking a standard work van in my own driveway. That is not commercial storage. That is commuting. Diane shook her head. Commuting is fine. Overnight storage is not. Your truck has equipment in it. That makes it commercial storage. I pulled out my service log binder from my bag. I brought this because I knew she would move the goalposts. I flipped it open to the inventory page. Pest control wand, inspection light, and a laptop. That is what I carry. No chemicals, no bulk supplies. This is a mobile office. She leaned over the counter. The rule does not care what you call it. It cares what the board decided. And the board decided in October that vehicles with visible equipment racks are subject to review. I stayed calm. My van does not have an equipment rack. It has a roof carrier for my extension wand. That is not the same thing. Diane pulled a printed photo from the binder. It was my van, shot from across the street, zoomed in on the roof. She slid it across the counter. Looks like a rack to me. I stared at the photo. The metadata strip at the bottom was cut off, but I could see the edge of a timestamp. When did you take this? She did not answer. She just tapped the laminated policy sheet again. I do not care what you think. I care what the rule says. If you want to appeal, you can submit a written request to the board. Deadline is this Friday. That was 2 days away. The board packet is being finalized this afternoon, and I have to get my evidence included before it is sealed. I knew that if I let her lock this down, I would be fighting from behind for months. I took a photo of the picture she had printed. Then I looked up. I need a copy of the October minutes. Right now. Diane pulled the binder back. Those are not public until they are approved at the next meeting. You will have to wait. I pulled out my phone again and opened the state HOA statute. Under Massachusetts law, unapproved minutes are still available to members within 10 days of the meeting. It has been 3 months. You are required to provide them. Diane exhaled slowly. She reached under the counter and pulled out a manila folder. She opened it, flipped through a few loose pages, and then closed it again. The October meeting was canceled. There are no minutes. I felt my jaw tighten. You just said the board approved the parking enforcement at the October meeting. She stared at me. I said the rule was approved. I did not say when. The rule itself has been in place for years. I leaned on the counter. Then why did you reference October? Why did the tow notice cite a specific board decision from a meeting that did not happen? Diane slid the folder back under the counter. You are misunderstanding the process. The rule is enforced continuously. The board does not need to vote every time someone parks illegally. I stayed very still. My sister had warned me about this. Survey Ridge Terrace had a reputation. 3 years ago, a neighbor named Colin had been fined for unapproved exterior paint, even though his receipt showed the color had been pre-approved in writing. The fine stuck because the approval letter vanished from the files. Colin paid it and moved out 6 months later. The story never made sense, but no one had pressed it because the HOA always had an answer ready. Now I was starting to see the shape of it. I pulled out my notebook. I want a full copy of every board meeting packet from the last 2 years. I am filing a formal records request. Diane tapped her nails on the counter. That will take weeks to compile. You will have to pay the copying fee. I wrote down the date and time on a blank page, tore it out, and slid it across. Here is the request in writing. I will pay whatever the statute allows. I need them by next Monday. She picked up the paper and dropped it into a desk tray without looking at it. We will see what we can do. I walked out of the clubhouse and back to my driveway. The tow sticker was still on my van. I peeled it off carefully and put it in a plastic bag. Then I sat in the driver's seat and opened my laptop. I pulled up the portal again and started going through every posted board packet from the last 3 years. September minutes mentioned parking. October was missing. November minutes opened with a note that the October meeting had been rescheduled due to lack of quorum, but there was no mention of parking enforcement. I clicked back to September and read the full text. The board had discussed a parking compliance review, but tabled it pending legal input. There was no vote. I screenshotted the page. Then I opened the tow company email that had been CC'd to me when Diane called in the pickup. The timestamp showed the request had been filed at 10 in the morning, 2 hours before Diane confronted me. The authorization field listed her name and title, but the reference number was blank. I forwarded the email to myself and highlighted the blank field. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my neighbor across the street, Lena. She was a community manager for another HOA in Brookline and had spotted violations instantly the first time Diane tried to find me for a trash bin placement. The text said, "Saw the sticker. You okay?" I texted back, working on it. "Do you have time to look at something?" She replied immediately, "Come over." I grabbed my laptop and the plastic bag with the sticker and walked across the street. Lena opened the door before I knocked. She was holding a coffee mug and wearing reading glasses. She waved me into the kitchen and pointed at the table. "Show me." I set the laptop down and pulled up the email. Lena leaned over and scrolled through it. She stopped at the authorization field. "This is incomplete. The tow company should not have dispatched without a reference number. Did Diane give them a verbal override?" "I do not know. She told me it was based on a board decision, but the meeting she cited never happened." Lena sat down and pulled the laptop closer. She opened a new tab and logged into a public records database. "What is your HOA name?" "Survey Ridge Terrace Association." She typed it in and pulled up a list of filed documents. Board meeting minutes are supposed to be filed with the city clerk within 30 days in Massachusetts. Let us see what they have. The list loaded. September minutes were there. October was missing. November showed a reschedule note. Lena clicked on September and read the parking discussion section. She looked up. This says they tabled it. There is no enforcement authority here. I know. But Diane is acting like the rule is active, and she has the paperwork to back it up. Lena closed the laptop. She does not. She is bluffing. And if she called in a tow without proper authorization, the vendor is going to be pissed when they find out. I leaned back in the chair. How do I prove she is lying about the meeting? Lena tapped the table. You file a complaint with the city clerk. If the HOA failed to file required minutes, that is a violation. The clerk will follow up, and if they find a pattern of missing records, the board gets flagged. That puts pressure on Diane to produce the real documents, or admit there was no vote. I pulled out my phone and took a note. What about the tow authorization? Lena stood and refilled her coffee. Call the vendor. Ask them to confirm the authorization process. If Diane has been calling in favors and skipping required steps, they need to know. Most tow companies do not want to be in the middle of an HOA scam. I stayed for another 10 minutes while Lena walked me through the complaint process. Then I went home and drafted the city clerk email. I attached the September minutes screenshot, the missing October entry, and the tow company email with the blank authorization field. I wrote a short summary explaining that the HOA had cited a non-existent meeting to justify enforcement, and that I was requesting a formal review. I hit send at 4 in the afternoon. The next morning, I woke up to a new violation notice taped to my front door. It was printed on HOA letterhead with Diane's signature at the bottom. The notice said I had failed to respond to a prior compliance request, and that my account was being referred to collections. The violation was dated 3 weeks ago. I had never received it. I took a photo of the notice and the empty envelope it came in. Then I checked my mailbox. Nothing. I walked back inside and opened the portal. There was no record of a prior notice. I clicked through every alert and message thread. The only entry was the tow warning from yesterday. I called the HOA management company. The receptionist transferred me to the compliance coordinator. Her name was Sandra. I explained the situation and asked if she had a record of the prior notice. Sandra put me on hold. When she came back, she sounded confused. I see the note in the system, but it was entered manually yesterday afternoon. There is no outbound tracking. It should have been mailed certified if it was a pre-collections warning. So it was never sent. Sandra hesitated. I cannot confirm that. But the entry does not match our standard workflow. I asked Sandra to flag the entry and send me a copy of the workflow log. She said she would email it by end of day. I thanked her and hung up. Then I texted Lena. Diane just backdated a violation notice. She is trying to justify collections before I can fight the tow. Lena replied, that is fraud. Document everything. Do not engage with her directly until you have a witness. I spent the rest of the morning pulling every piece of paper I had. Service logs, receipts, portal screenshots, the tow sticker, the backdated notice, and the email exchange with Sandra. I organized them in a binder with tabs and page numbers. Then I drafted a formal appeal letter to the board. I cited the missing October minutes, the blank tow authorization, the backdated notice, and the portal discrepancy. I requested an emergency hearing and copied the city clerk, the management company, and the tow vendor. I printed 3 copies and drove to the clubhouse. Diane was not there. The front desk was staffed by a part-time admin named Rachel. I handed her the sealed envelopes and asked her to log them in the receipt book. She wrote down the time and date and gave me a stamped copy. As I walked out, I saw Diane pulling into the parking lot. She got out of her car holding a clipboard and a stopwatch. She walked straight to my van and started measuring the distance from the curb to the rear bumper. She wrote something on the clipboard and then took a photo with her phone. I walked over. What are you doing? Diane did not look up. Routine compliance check. Your vehicle is parked 4 inches over the property line. I glanced at the curb. My van was centered in the driveway, exactly where it had been for 8 months. The property line runs along the inside edge of the curb. I am not over it. Diane held up the stopwatch like it proved something. I measured it twice. You are in violation. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of her measuring setup. Then I walked to the curb and crouched down. The edge of my rear tire was 2 inches inside the property line. Diane had measured from the corner of the bumper, which extended slightly past the tire. She was counting the overhang as a violation. I stood up. The rule measures from the tire contact point, not the bumper. Diane clicked the stopwatch. I do not care what you think. I care what the rule says. The rule says no part of the vehicle can extend past the line. I opened the parking section on my phone and read it aloud. The rule says vehicles must be parked within the designated driveway space, measured from the rear axle center line to the property boundary. That is engineering language. It means tires, not bumpers. Diane snapped a photo of the bumper and turned to leave. You will receive a formal notice by end of week. I watched her walk back to her car. She was moving fast, like she had somewhere to be. I took one more photo of the curb and the tire position, then went inside and added it to the binder. That afternoon, Sandra from the management company emailed me the workflow log. The entry for the prior violation notice was timestamped at 3:42 the previous afternoon, 6 minutes after I left the clubhouse. The entry was marked as a manual override with no outbound tracking. The note field said, verbal approval from AC chair. I forwarded the email to Lena with a single line, she is creating a paper trail after the fact. Lena called me 10 minutes later. This is bad. She is not just making mistakes. She is fabricating records to justify enforcement. You need to escalate this now. I told her about the curb measurement. Lena laughed, but it was not a happy sound. She is trying to bait you into yelling so she can clip it and post it out of context. Do not give her the satisfaction. Stay calm, keep recording, and let her hang herself. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Colin and the paint approval. If Diane had done this before, there would be a pattern. I opened my laptop and searched the HOA portal for any mention of his name. Nothing came up. I tried the public records database. Still nothing. Then, I remembered something Lena had said. Board meeting minutes are filed with the city clerk. I pulled up the clerk database again and searched for Survey Ridge Terrace meeting minutes from 3 years ago. Most of them were there, but 2 were missing. March and July. I clicked on the surrounding months. February minutes ended with a note about scheduling a paint variance hearing for Colin. April minutes opened with a line about enforcement action being finalized. There was no March packet. I screenshotted the full timeline. Then I went to the July gap. June minutes mentioned a collections referral for unpaid fines. August minutes confirmed the lien had been filed. July was missing again. I leaned back and stared at the screen. Diane had been running the same playbook for years. Fabricate enforcement, skip the required meeting, backdate the notices, and bury the gaps in missing minutes. Colin had paid because he did not know how to fight it. Now she was trying it on me. I opened a new document and started building a timeline. Every missing meeting, every backdated notice, every blank authorization field. I cross-referenced them with the portal logs and the city clerk filings. By 2 in the morning, I had a 4-page summary with 18 discrepancies. The next day was Friday, the board packet deadline. I printed the timeline and added it to my binder. Then I drove to the clubhouse and asked Rachel if Diane was available. Rachel said she was in a meeting. I asked when the meeting would end. Rachel said she did not know. I sat in the lobby and waited. An hour later, Diane walked out of the back office with 2 other board members. She saw me and stopped. Can I help you? I stood up and held out the binder. I need this included in the board packet before it is finalized. Diane did not take it. The packet was sealed this morning. You missed the deadline. I checked my phone. It was 11:15. The deadline is 5 p.m. today. I am early. Diane folded her arms. The deadline is for submissions that were pre-approved. Your appeal was not on the agenda. I stayed calm. The bylaws say any member can submit materials for board review up to the packet deadline. There is no pre-approval requirement. One of the other board members, a man in his 60s named Paul, stepped forward. Diane, he is right. If the packet is not sealed, we have to accept it. Diane glared at him. The packet is sealed. Paul looked at her. You just said it was sealed this morning. That means it is not filed yet. We can reopen it. Diane exhaled sharply. She took the binder from my hand and dropped it on the front desk without opening it. I will review it. If it is relevant, it will be included. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the binder on the desk with the timestamp visible. Then I looked at Paul. I would like confirmation that it will be included in full. No redactions. Paul nodded. I will make sure of it. Diane walked past me without another word. I stayed in the lobby until Rachel logged the binder into the receipt book. Then I left. That weekend, I got a call from the tow vendor. The dispatcher introduced himself as Miguel. He said he was following up on the authorization issue. I told him about the blank reference field and the missing October meeting. Miguel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We got a call from your HOA this morning. Someone named Diane. She said you were harassing her and that we should block any future service requests from your address." I sat up. She told you to blacklist me? Miguel sighed. Yeah. But we do not do that without a police report or a restraining order. And when I pulled the original dispatch log, I noticed the authorization was incomplete. I called her back to get the reference number. She said it was verbal approval from the board president. Did you confirm that with the president? Miguel hesitated. No. She said he was out of town and would call me Monday. I told Miguel about the missing minutes and the backdated notices. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, I am going to flag this account. If she calls in another tow, we are going to require written authorization with a board signature and a meeting reference. No exceptions. I thanked him and hung up. Then I texted Lena. The tow vendor admits Karen has been calling in favors and skipping required authorization steps. Lena replied immediately, that is your smoking gun. Use it. Monday morning, I received an email from the city clerk. The subject line said, Records Compliance Review. I opened it and read the full message. The clerk had reviewed my complaint and confirmed that Survey Ridge Terrace Association had failed to file October minutes within the required 30-day window. The email said the HOA had been contacted and given 10 business days to produce the missing records or provide a written explanation. A copy of the notice had been sent to the board president and the management company. I forwarded the email to Lena and Sandra. Then I printed it and added it to the binder. That afternoon, I got a call from Paul, the board member who had helped me at the clubhouse. He said the board was scheduling an emergency meeting for Thursday night to address my appeal. He asked if I could attend. I said yes. Paul lowered his voice. You should know, Diane is not happy. She tried to have your binder excluded from the packet, but I overruled her. The other board members saw it. They have questions. What kind of questions? Paul hesitated. About the missing minutes. About the tow authorization. About Colin. I felt a weight lift off my chest. They know about Colin? Paul exhaled. One of the board members remembered the case. She pulled the old files. The paint approval letter was in there. It was never lost. Diane just told Colin it was. I closed my eyes. How many others? Paul did not answer right away. We are looking into it. That is all I can say right now. The call ended. I sat in my kitchen and stared at the binder. Everything was in there. The timeline, the screenshots, the missing minutes, the blank authorization, the backdated notice, the workflow log, the city clerk email. I had built the case piece by piece, and now the board was finally looking at it. Thursday night, I arrived at the clubhouse at 6:30. The meeting was scheduled for 7. The lobby was already crowded. Lena was there, along with a few neighbors I recognized. Paul was setting up chairs in the back office, which doubled as the meeting room. Diane was standing near the front desk, talking to Rachel in a low voice. She saw me and turned away. At 7, Paul called the meeting to order. There were 5 board members present. Diane sat at the far end of the table with her arms folded. Paul read the agenda. The first item was my appeal. Paul asked me to present my case. I stood and opened the binder. I walked through the timeline step by step. The missing October minutes. the blank tow authorization, the backdated violation notice, the portal discrepancy, the workflow log, the city clerk complaint, the vendor confirmation. I kept my voice calm and factual. I did not editorialize. I just laid out the evidence. When I finished, Paul asked Diane if she wanted to respond. Diane stood and pulled out her own binder. She flipped it open and started reading from a prepared statement. She said the October meeting had been canceled due to lack of quorum, and that the parking enforcement was based on a standing rule that did not require a new vote. She said the tow authorization was verbal and that the vendor had accepted it at the time. She said the backdated notice was a clerical error and that I had been verbally notified during our prior conversation. Paul held up a hand. Diane, the vendor confirmed they require written authorization for all dispatches. They said you gave them verbal approval but never followed up with documentation. How do you explain that? Diane closed her binder. The vendor is mistaken. I provided everything they needed. Paul looked at me. Do you have the vendor contact information? I nodded. I pulled out my phone and handed it to Paul. He dialed the number on speaker. Miguel answered after 2 rings. Paul introduced himself and explained the situation. Miguel confirmed everything I had said. He added that Diane had called him that morning and tried to pressure him into retracting his statement. The room went silent. Paul thanked Miguel and hung up. He looked at Diane. Do you have anything else to add? Diane stood and picked up her binder. This is a witch hunt. You are letting him weaponize the process because he does not like being held accountable. One of the other board members, a woman named Susan, leaned forward. Diane, we pulled the call-in file. The paint approval letter was in there. You told him it was lost. Why? Diane froze. That was 3 years ago. I do not remember the details. Susan slid a folder across the table. I have the letter right here. It is signed and dated. It was in the architectural committee files the whole time. Diane did not pick up the folder. She just stared at it. Paul cleared his throat. Diane, this is serious. If you have been fabricating enforcement actions, we need to know. The city clerk is already reviewing our records. If they find a pattern, the entire board could be held liable. Diane looked around the table. No one was on her side. She grabbed her binder and walked out. The door slammed behind her. Paul waited a moment, then looked at me. We are going to vote on your appeal. But first, I want to address the broader issue. We are launching an internal audit of all enforcement actions taken under Diane's authority for the last 5 years. If we find evidence of fraud, we will refer it to law enforcement. The board voted unanimously to void the tow authorization, remove the parking violation from my record, and issue a formal apology. They also voted to suspend Diane from the architectural committee pending the outcome of the audit. Susan read a motion aloud. It was a public censure. The language was formal and blunt. It stated that Diane had violated her fiduciary duty, misrepresented HOA authority, and created false records. The motion passed 4-0. Diane was not present to vote. Paul looked at me. I am sorry this happened. We should have caught it sooner. I nodded. I appreciate that. The meeting ended at 9. Lena waited for me in the lobby. She gave me a hug and said, "You did it." I did not feel like celebrating yet. I wanted to see the audit results. I wanted to know how many others had been targeted. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. 2 weeks later, the board released the audit summary. It covered 38 enforcement actions over 5 years. 12 of them were based on missing or backdated documentation. 7 involved fabricated meeting references. 4 were tied to vendors who confirmed they had received incomplete authorization. The report recommended referring the findings to the district attorney and terminating Diane's committee membership. The board voted to adopt the recommendations. Diane resigned the next day. The HOA attorney forced a retraction letter, and the board read it aloud at the next meeting. The letter acknowledged that the parking enforcement against me had been improper, that the tow authorization was invalid, and that the backdated notice was a violation of procedure. The HOA removed the enforcement action and voided the ledger entry. My account was cleared. Karen's complaint was ruled unfounded with evidence cited. The board included the vendor confirmation, the city clerk review, and the workflow log in the final report. Susan made sure the stopwatch and ruler routine got mocked by the room. Someone joked that Diane should have measured her credibility instead of bumpers. The room laughed. It felt good. A month later, I ran into Colin at a coffee shop in Brookline. I recognized him from an old neighborhood photo. I introduced myself and told him what had happened. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "I knew I was right. I just did not have the energy to fight it." I told him the board had issued a formal apology and that his fine had been reversed. He smiled. It was small, but it was real. I kept the binder. I added the audit summary, the retraction letter, and the board resolution. I put it on a shelf in my office. Every time I see it, I remember that the rules are only as fair as the people enforcing them. And sometimes, you have to reopen a cold case to make sure justice is not buried with the missing minutes. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all the support.